good evening, everyone. Welcome to our next Sustainable Stow tonight. I'm Tina McAndrew, the director of the Randall Library. We will be recording this, so just so you know, and it will be posted on Stow TV as soon as Jonathan can get to it. So I would just ask that you stay muted for background noise so that others can hear. Arnie is more than willing to entertain any questions or comments you have while he's talking. So if you feel like raising your hand or putting it in the chat, either way, Rick and I will be looking at that. So I guess without further ado, I'll hand it over to Rick.
Thank you, Tina. As some of you know, we've been doing this series of talks now for like 2 years, and it's been great. And we get a lot of views on Stow TV too. So, you know, you're asking questions tonight, you may see your question on Stow TV. So Arnie Epstein joins us from the Green Advisory Committee tonight. And the Green Advisory Committee is and Arnie will introduce it more officially. But you can think of a Green Advisory Committee as being the official town climate committee. Sustainable Stow at this point sort of works on volunteer efforts on various activist projects. Somebody asked me the other day, is Sustainable Stow still existing if the Green Advisory Committee has been created? And the answer is absolutely yes, because the two groups have different missions and can do different things. And so tonight, Arnie will be talking about one of maybe the major project of the Green Advisory Committee, and it's something that Sustainable Stow could never really take on in its current status. So Sustainable Stow goes back in one version or another over 10 years. And it was with Arnie and Sharon's leadership responsible for the Heat Smart effort, the grant and the effort in Stow, as well as Solarize Stow. It's done a variety of other projects. Those projects will continue, but we cannot do the kind of important systematic planning and engagement of the town that the Green Advisory Committee can do, working with the select board and other bodies in town. So that's where the two work together, but differently. And if I said some part of that wrong, Arnie or Sharon, please let me know. Anyway, so Arnie's been working on this, as I say, one way or another for over, I don't know, 10 or 12 years. He's the town, has been, still is, I think, the town energy manager and our unofficial representative to Hudson Light and Power, which is important at times. So I want to turn it over to Arnie. Thank you for all your work.
Thank you, Rick. Yeah, so I'm Arnie Epstein. Thank you for coming to this webinar tonight. I'm the chair of the new Green Advisory Committee that Rick just mentioned, and I think Rick did a great job in sort of setting the stage for what the difference is between the Green Advisory Committee and Sustainable Stow, but I'll speak to that a little bit more during the presentation. So I am going to share screen, and hopefully this is all going to work. So I hope you're seeing.
Yep, we are.
Screen, great. So I'm going to move right along to.
Arnie, I should have said that people can put questions in the chat as you go, or in effect, put your hand up electronically and ask a question. Arnie said he'll take questions as the presentation goes. So you can do either or both.
So the town has a formal committee called the Stow Green Advisory Committee, which was formed by our select board a little over a year ago, maybe almost, yeah, about 14, 15 months ago. And much of the reason why the select board felt it was a good idea at that time to create a formal committee was because the state had recently passed a landmark climate bill, often called the Next Generation Climate Bill, that established legally binding limits for greenhouse gas emission reductions, starting actually a couple of years from now in 2025, all the way through 2050, and with interim targets along the way every 5 years. And what the select board wanted the Green Advisory Committee to do, among other things, was to allow or to enable the town to align itself with those emissions reduction targets. So we'll be talking about that later in the presentation. So we've been meeting now since a little over a year, and as contrasted with the Sustainable Stow, we are a formal town committee. We've been finding out more and more what that means in terms of what we can and can't do, as compared to Sustainable Stow, which is a volunteer group. So this is the makeup of the committee. Formally we're a 9-member committee. I'm currently the chair. Sharon is the vice chair, and Carol, who's on the line, also is the clerk and select board representative. We have representatives from other boards and committees, as you can see, and 2 at-large members on our committee who were appointed by the select board. So our charter is to work with the select board's mandate to align the town of Stow with the greenhouse gas emission targets adopted by the state in the legislation we talked about earlier. And we're doing that through a process called the development of a climate action plan, which we'll talk about later. And part of that charter is to obviously improve energy efficiency, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but also to help the town mitigate the impacts of climate change. So it's probably already obvious to most of you that climate change is upon us. It's anticipated that the impacts will become more severe over the coming years, and one of our missions is to help the town adapt to and cope with those changes. So this is just to highlight some of the activities that the committee has been working on or has accomplished since we've started a little over a year ago. One of the items is that, as I think Rick mentioned, I'm the representative from Stow to the board of Hudson Light and Power. I'm not a voting member, but I do attend all the board meetings. And we've established a good working relationship with our utility. We do have a formal liaison with Hudson Light and Power, so we can speak to them at any time. And one of the things we were able to accomplish earlier this year was to work with Hudson Light and Power to have them provide a financial incentive to developers for building energy efficient all electric homes. That's a big deal, as we'll talk about a little bit later. And as far as I'm aware, and you may know that Hudson Light and Power is what's called a municipal light plant, as opposed to the larger utilities like Eversource and National Grid. As far as I'm aware, Hudson Light and Power was the first municipal light plant utility in the state to offer such an incentive to developers of new housing. We also work with them to get them to double the annual rebate for municipal energy efficiency measures. And a couple of other items that are on this slide as well, that we'll return to that last bullet later in the presentation on fossil fuel use in new municipal buildings. Some of the other work that we've done is on this slide. As you may be aware, there's two large developments in the works in town. One is called Athens Lane and the other is in Stow Acres. Taken together, there'll be ultimately over 300 new housing units in the town, which is significant for a town where we currently have on the order of 26 to 2,700 housing units. So it's important that those new homes not add to our emissions burden that we already have. So we are working with the developers. To date, that has been a very productive relationship. In fact, the developer for Athens Lane in their initial application to the town did say that they were planning to make all of the homes that they include in that development all electric. We're planning, and we'll speak to this a little bit later, a survey of residents to get your views on what your actions are and what you believe the town's priorities ought to be in addressing climate change and adapting to the impacts of climate change. We are also going to be launching fairly soon a new website called Mass Energize. And one of the things we'll talk to a little bit later is we're going to have an article on Springtown meeting for the adoption of a new energy code, which building energy code, which will really move us well along the road of making sure that all new construction in the town is energy efficient and strongly encourages all electric construction. And we'll be speaking very shortly about the climate action plan that I alluded to earlier. So what is a climate action plan? So what it is a framework for the town to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and create a town that is resilient to the impacts of climate change. We're working, as we'll see in a later slide, on getting a draft of that plan available later this winter. And our target is to have a final document available by the summer, early summer. One of the things I want to point out here, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, the state legislation provides for emission targets all the way through 2050. We are focusing really on the next 8 years with the climate action plan that we're developing now. We think that's a realistic approach, that we can actually develop actions that we can work on to meet our targets, which are very aggressive for 2030, as we'll see. And then as we move forward, through this decade, then we can start to think more about the targets beyond 2030. So what we're doing, then the way we're approaching the climate action plan is breaking the emissions for the town of Stow into major sectors, each of which we'll cover a little bit more detail later in the presentation. And that last bullet on this slide, resilience, has to do with the town's ability to adapt to the impacts of climate change. So here is the schedule that we're working on for the climate action plan. In March of next year, we are planning to have a draft version of the plan available, which will incorporate the work that we as a committee have been doing, but also the work that we've been doing in speaking to other boards, committees, and departments in the town, and the findings from a survey of residents and businesses that we'll speak to a little bit later. And as I mentioned earlier, we're targeting this summer for the initial release of the plan. So after the plan is released this summer, what the Green Advisory Committee will sort of transition, in a sense, from the creation of the plan to oversight of the plan. So in that capacity, what we'll be doing is working with other town boards and committees and departments who will probably be responsible for some of the nuts and bolts of implementing aspects of the plan, as well as residents and businesses. We'll provide periodic updates on the progress that we've been making towards meeting our targets. And we know that, you know, whenever you create a plan, things will change. So there will be periodic updates to the plan, and we'll work with other groups responsible for actually implementing aspects of the plan and help them, particularly in finding funding opportunities to make all this happen. And if I haven't said so far, it's obvious that the Green Advisory Committee can't, you know, do this by itself. We are partnering with other boards, committees, and departments in the town. We are looking forward and already have been working closely with Sustainable Stow, and looking forward to working with other town groups, as well as town residents and businesses. And we'll return to this again. One of the keys for success, we can't do this all on our own, is to find funding opportunities to make some of the necessary actions realistic. We're looking for anticipated funding from the new state administration, and we're also anticipating some of the federal legislation that you may have heard about that passed late last summer, called the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Bill, to provide additional funding for the town to implement our climate action plan. And now I'm going to speak to what we call the challenges facing Stow. How, you know, what do we need to accomplish in order to meet these emission reduction targets for 2030 and align ourselves with the state's new next generation climate legislation. So this slide shows you graphically where most of the greenhouse gas emissions in the town come from. They are almost equally divided between the buildings in Stow and transportation. And in order to meet our 2030 targets, those emissions, and we'll speak to each of those sectors in turn, need to be reduced by a significant amount between, you can see the baseline that we have was 2017, between that year and 2030 by approximately a third in both sectors to align ourselves with the state's overall target. So what I'm going to do now is speak a little bit to each of those sectors in turn. And the first one I'm going to start with is our existing buildings. And within the town, the greenhouse gas emissions are divided among our private homes and commercial buildings and municipal buildings. And looking at our emissions inventory, the primary source of greenhouse gas emissions is from our existing homes. And that in turn is a result of using fossil fuels, burning fossil fuels for heating and hot water for our home. And that's obviously fuel oil, natural gas, and propane. And the primary strategy that the town will adopt to reduce the emissions associated with the burning of those fossil fuels is to do two things. One is what's called weatherization, which means adding insulation and air sealing to a building to lower the total heat demand of the building. And the other is to convert the heating system itself from using fossil fuels like fuel oil and natural gas to using what's called an electric heat pump. And that electric heat pump can be used to displace all fossil fuel use for heating in the home, or it can also be beneficial if it's a partial displacement of fossil fuels. So that's the primary strategy in the building sector. For those of you who participated a couple of years ago in the Sustainable Stow Heat Smart initiative, you're already familiar with heat pumps and how they can be used to both reduce your use of fuel oil or natural gas, as well as saving money through the course of the winter. And we will be doing community outreach with programs similar to Heat Smart in the coming years. And as I mentioned earlier, we're anticipating additional funding both at the state and federal level starting next year to help us with this retrofit of many of the homes in our town. Now, the other area in the building sector clearly is new buildings, and as I already mentioned, we are anticipating there's going to be a substantial number of new homes in town over the next few years, primarily from those two large developments. And what we want to ensure is that those new homes don't significantly add to the burden of emissions that we already have to address from our existing homes. So, so that is both those new homes, primarily from the two new developments, but also smaller developments and single home construction, as well as any new municipal and commercial buildings in the town. And one of the things we're going to speak to a little bit more is the state has just released what they call a new building energy code, which is a opt-in energy code. And the Green Advisory Committee is going to be putting the adoption of that new energy code on the warrant for Springtown meeting this year. And we feel it's important that the town adopt this. It will work with the activities that we're already engaged in to make it to strongly encourage developers to both build energy efficient homes and to make them all electric. And we're also asking the select board to adopt a policy for new municipal buildings that would prohibit, with certain exceptions, the use of fossil fuels in new municipal buildings. So turning to transportation, that's the sector that we saw earlier is about equivalent in terms of emissions to buildings. Similarly to what we found for buildings, most greenhouse gas emissions in the transportation sector are from private vehicles, and a smaller percent is from commercial and municipal vehicles. And here again, the primary strategy for reducing those emissions is converting from using internal combustion engines that burn gasoline or diesel, emitting CO2, to all electric vehicles or plug-in hybrids. And those are both much more efficient than internal combustion engine vehicles, but they also, and we'll return to this later, they also emit a small fraction of the greenhouse gas emissions that internal combustion engines do. Although this isn't the case for everyone, but for most homeowners in town, they are living in single-family residential homes. One advantage of that is that those homeowners do have the ability to charge at home. So for most, but not all residents of Stow, it is easier than to rely on public charging if you can do charging at home. And as with the building sector, we're going to be looking to do community outreach. We are anticipating additional state and federal incentives. There already are state and federal incentives that you may be familiar with for the purchase of electric vehicles. And we're going to be looking for the best opportunities for installing public charging, as well as looking at alternative forms of transportation that people might adopt, such as electric bikes, and looking to convert our school bus fleet to electric school buses down the road, as well as town vehicles where feasible. And finally, I'm going to just speak to natural solutions. And natural solutions talks about all of the great land that we have here in Stow. And, you know, one of the goals of the Climate Action Plan is to ensure that the town not only maintains but expands the town's natural resources. That's got many benefits. It both increases the resiliency of the town to help it adapt to the impacts of climate change. It protects biodiversity, but also it will help meet our greenhouse gas emissions targets, because as particularly the forests in town grow, they draw carbon out of the atmosphere and sequester it in the trees themselves, and it's a form of negative emissions. And as I mentioned earlier, the other aspect of what we're doing in the Climate Action Plan is addressing resiliency, you know, our ability to adapt to and thrive with the impacts of climate change. And the town has already taken steps there in the creation of a municipal vulnerability report that will be leveraging quite heavily in the Climate Action Plan. So I just wanted to point out that the town of Stow can really be a leader here. The two townwide initiatives that we've had over the last 6 or 7 years, the Stow Solar Challenge and Heat Smart, were both very successful. We had, in both cases, over 10% of the households participating in these initiatives. They didn't necessarily install solar or install a heat pump, but they were interested enough to, contact us and contact an installer. So we know that many folks in town are already aware of and are thinking about participating in these types of activities. We'd like to request that you participate with us in the creation of this climate action plan and consider the environmental and financial benefits of the types of actions that you can take personally to both help the environment and your pocketbook. So to wrap up the presentation, I'd like to invite you to come to our meetings. The meetings of the Green Advisory Committee are the first and third Thursday of every month at 7 p.m. You can attend either in person at the town building or via Zoom. The agendas for our meeting are posted on the town website at the link shown below, or you can contact us through that email address, greenadvisory@stow-mass.gov. And thank you very much for listening to the presentation. And at this point, I guess I can stop share and welcome your comments or questions.
Yeah, we're open. We don't have any comments or questions yet in the chat. Does anybody want to raise a hand and ask a question? You'll have to take yourself off mute to do that.
Hi, this is Art McDonald. I just came in late. My apologies. I will be at the meeting tomorrow. I'm very interested in everything you're doing. So thank you. All
Great.
caps.
Look
So-
forward to your attending our meeting, either via Zoom or in person.
Yeah, I taught sustainability analytics at Harvard and water quality analytics at Boston University. And this really appeals to me, and I could go on. So anyway.
Art, are you a Stow resident?
For 30 years, yes, sir. 200 Hudson Road, stop by anytime.
You're a resource we should know about.
I saw there's some opportunity on your committee that is vacant, and I'm easy to trick, so maybe we can talk. I don't know what you need, but I'd be glad to serve.
Great. Well, we're really looking forward to your being at our meeting tomorrow evening.
Yes.
Thank you, Art.
Okay.
And Sharon and Ellen both have their hands raised. Sharon?
Yes, I just wanted to mention that we are doing a survey of the community. And so the survey is a general attitude. And when this presentation is recorded and put up on Stow TV, there at the end of the presentation, there will be a slide that will give you a link to the survey, and really encourage everyone to fill it out, because that's going to be very informative to us as we go forward. Thank you.
Alan?
Sure. Thanks, Arnie. I'm obviously pretty familiar with it, what you guys are doing, but you surprised me with one little thing. I didn't realize that you were really giving up on the 2025 emission reduction mandates set forth in the Next Gen Roadmap Act, and are focused on 2030. Now, as I understand it, the way they calculate time, it's the end of the year So there really are 3 more years to the end of 2025. Why hasn't the committee decided to make that a target for some limited gains?
Well, it's a good question, Alan. We started out actually before the 2025 limits were set. They were not, I'm sure you well know, the bill that was passed didn't specify what the 2025 limits would be. So we had the 2030 limits in hand. The 2025 limits are, we're getting kind of a late start in trying to meet those targets. They're not, as you well know, they're not nearly as aggressive as the 2030 limits. So our focus is probably better put as through 2030. I really didn't mean to imply that we were ignoring the 2025 limits, but that we were not focusing our efforts at this point beyond 2030.
Okay.
That sounds like a good clarification for the work going forward. Other questions? Everybody's quiet. All right, well, maybe you've answered everybody's questions for
No,
tonight.
that would be great, but I do want to just say again, and I'm really pleased that Art will be joining us at our meeting tomorrow. That we do really want to work together, and if you do have questions, we have the Green Advisory Committee email address that we are starting to get a number of comments and questions through, and that you're more than welcome to attend our meeting. We do have a standing item on our agenda for residents to participate.
And for those of you who arrived late and still have, I know I get questions all the time. Again, we have 2 committees in Stow. One is Sustainable Stow, which is a volunteer committee working on climate issues, and it's the committee that's been running this series of educational programs. And the other is the Green Advisory Committee, which reports to the Select Board and is responsible for putting together the Climate Action Plan. And we sort of work together. So if you get an idea for something else and it doesn't really fit what the Green Advisory Committee is doing, please let Sustainable Stow know. We may pick it up as a project. You never can tell. Anything else before we close for today?
So I'd just like to do one more plug for the survey that Sharon mentioned. And you will be hearing from us again in the next couple of months about that new opt-in stretch code that we're putting on the warrant for spring town meeting. And we're really hopeful that the town of Stow will be one of the early adopters of this new building energy code. And we think, that the town, particularly with our very low electric rates and clean electricity, is a very good candidate for being one of the early adopters of this new code. So you'll be hearing from us over the next few months about that item on the warrant.
And watch for the questionnaire. One last plug. So, Tina, over to you. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you all for coming. This was recorded, so if you missed any part of it, you can visit Stow TV probably within a week to view it online. So again, thank you all for coming and have a great evening.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for hosting.